Enjoyed is not exactly the right word.
Hi, I'm Scott Murphy, and I'm the director of Mirror Visions Ensemble. And we have an upcoming concert on October 5th at Merkin Hall that features a commissioned work from our wonderful composer, Randall Ang, that we asked him to write for this concert, and it's very exciting. So welcome, Randall. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Scott. I'm happy to be here.
I remember when we spoke probably 3 years ago now about you writing something for us that we had no idea what your poem or topic would be, and we were just going round and round about it. And then I remembered, actually prompted by Daniel McGrew, this poem that I'd read a while ago, and I'd totally forgotten. He shared it with me, and I said, "Oh my God, I've read this before," and I had chill bumps. I was really moved and shaken by this poem because it was just so intense. And so I set it aside and thought maybe, but that's a little crazy. Maybe that's a little too much. But ultimately, that's what we agreed to do. So I hope you enjoyed entering this world of the poem.
Enjoyed is not exactly the right word. It's a very difficult poem in that, it's a totally accessible poem, but it's very visceral.
Yeah.
It is violent. It centers on an act of violence, and it made me kind of live in some emotional places that were not so easy to be in for the length of time it took me to write this poem. But I feel like the power of the poem is so intense. And you'd asked me to write something for four guys.
Right. That was another thing which
Um,
I did find, because the violence is created by a group of boys in the poem. I thought that that might be an interesting take and setting of four men's voices with piano for this particular poem.
yeah, I read it and I thought, this is an amazing poem. I don't want to set it at first.
Yeah.
But then the more I thought about what this challenge was going to be to take on, like, what is special about a group of four guys to
Mm-hmm.
write for, the more I realized that actually you can't explore the kinds of things that this poem is going to let me explore with four guys, with another kind of text. The piece is a lot about masculinity
Yeah.
and violence, and I things that I haven't really dealt with that much in my work before, and I thought, like, okay, it's going to be tough, but let me see what happens when I at least dip my toe into kind of imagining what it's like to embody these characters. And it's not just these four characters, and I think that's really what gave me the way into the poem, was that it's the four boys who do this act of violence, but it's also the girl
Yeah.
who owns this pet goat. And it's also, and importantly, the community of people around the girl who try to protect her from seeing the beheaded goat. I'm kind of giving away what happens in the poem, but
Yeah, I mean, the
um,
poem's out there, and you know, in case you didn't know, the poem is song by Bridget Pegeen Kelly, and it's a very long narrative poem. And of course, read it if you're coming to the concert. Read it in advance. It's kind of helpful to see all of the words in advance. The way you've said it, it is so sensitively done in terms of the juxtaposition of the poignancy and the horror of the violence and the fun even of the what you called the P-funk.
oh yeah,
The P-funk section,
yeah. There's a section
which
that's
is it's so welcome at that
yeah.
moment, because you know there's such a darkness to the poem that you really you really made a nice moment in that it isn't all dark all the time.
Yeah, well, I really wanted this setting to not just be about victimhood. So the poem goes into some descriptions of what the life of this girl and goat was like in the past, and that gave me an opportunity to go to a different kind of musical palette. And knowing that you guys were comfortable with doing some a cappella stuff that would kind of
Right.
like dig into some like R&B funk kind of things, I went to the more kind of celebratory, joyful place for that depiction of the past and why that relationship between the girl and the goat was meaningful before it was literally severed
Yeah.
by these boys. So that was like one aspect that was really important to me to understand kind of what that bond was
Hmm.
between them. And the other thing was in terms of like looking for some light. And this
Yeah.
was the end of the poem. You can read the end of the poem in a lot of ways. The goat head, severed head, sings. And there's ways of looking at it's an amazing moment in the poem. And of course, I mean, the name of the poem is Song,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, what a gift to a composer, right? But also, like, how like intimidating is that you're writing a piece that's called Song and involves this decapitated head
That
that's
sings.
singing, and it's singing to the boys. There is the first read I took on it, and actually the first, you never saw this draft, but I did a draft of the music where it was basically just haunting the boys, and it was trying to say like, you guys have done this to me, and you will carry this for the rest of your life, and that it was kind of very from a kind of justice kind of
Yeah.
point of view, which was intense. But I ultimately realized that my kind of where I wanted to go with this was partly that to say that there have to be consequences from what they did, and them living with the goat's song is part of that, but also that the goat is not fixed only on them, but it's that the goat song is going to live on. So I found a lot of kind of musical comfort
Yeah.
in thinking, like, especially, in the times that we live in, when we are silenced, like, is that the end? Or is there something that keeps going?
Right.
And that notion of a song from a head that shouldn't be able to sing, but is out in the world. I mean, the last line is that it is sweet. The heart, what is it? The
The
heart,
hardest. This the song is sweet.
yes.
When I read the poem, I had the darker
Mm-hmm.
ending in mind, but then as I lived with the poem, I did see sort of a sense of transformation for the boys that they hopefully will then atone for this horrible thing that they've done.
Yeah.
And your music obviously reflects that version of reading it, that moment where it turns in the final movement, what they didn't know.
Yeah.
That moment is so beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
That's the moment where it's transformative for them. It's no longer just haunting them because it should haunt them,
Mm-hmm.
but it also gives them an opportunity to learn from it and to hopefully do better in the future.
It is all that, but it's also not entirely about the voice. It's about the head, kind of like,
Not.
regardless of whether they have learned their lesson or not, the head's song is going to still be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was trying to create something. I mean, there's so much kind of angular stuff
Mm-hmm.
in the melodic writing, but that moment was I was trying to create something that was a
It
little
is
bit more
very
lyrical.
sweet, as the poem says. It's a very
Yeah.
sweet moment. How did you approach this musically in terms of your writing in general? I know that you read a lot of opera,
Mm-hmm.
and this is very dramatic. How did you approach this musically and decide what to do with it?
Sure. One of the other things that really attracted me to this poem was how many different characters there were in it,
Mm-hmm.
and how it's constantly shifting. Like, it's a narrative poem. It's third person, but it is there were many opportunities for me to be clearly for the music to be clearly coming from the point of view of the boys or the goat or the girl or the
Community.
community. Definitely did not have to just all be from the narrational voice, and I don't think I could have done it if not for that, because what I love about doing opera is embodying character.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that spoke to me about the poem, and then figuring out, like, even when there are narrational parts, when are the characters having feelings about what they're narrating, and when are
Right.
they just delivering on the page. The poem, if you look at it, it's like a wall of text.
Oh,
It is
I,
not the line there. It's just all the way to the end of the page.
it's dense.
The first thing I did is I just typed it all out for myself and changed all the line breaks. songs. So I wrote it all, which is what I do with actually all of my librettists.
Mm-hmm.
Is I take the sentences and then I kind of chop them up into much, much shorter bits. And then looking at that on the page allows me then to figure out, okay, what are the dramatic beats to this
Right.
whole thing? Because it's one giant movement in the poem that I knew I wanted to break up into smaller parts.
I'm wondering about the music itself because it's challenging music.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's actually come together really nicely.
Oh my God,
I mean,
sounds
we
fantastic.
cracked the code. We figured it out. But the number 7 is very prominent in meter,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a 4/4 bar followed by a 3/4
Yeah.
bar, or if it's just 7,
Yeah.
8. How does that play into what you were striving for?
That is kind of just part and parcel of what I do. Most of my music is rhythmic, and I'm very interested in pulse. There's a lot of jazz in my background, and that kind of propulsiveness of regular pulse that kind of moves around with complicated time signature kind of stuff is in a lot of my work. I'm also really interested in the way that like one person or one instrument kind of staying steady and other people being not steady on top of that.
Right.
Those kind of that interplay is really interesting to me. I mean, a lot of the pieces based on repeated like vamp sections.
Right. The piano has these loops that are da da dee da 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 da
Yeah.
da 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 da.
Yeah, so
And
the 7/8 the portion that is the end of the piece.
it's mesmerizing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just that's really kind of like about. I mean, what's special to me about like those kinds of figures is that little lift you get at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. The 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
But the phrasing it over the bar line into
Yeah. Which then plays into the fact that it repeats and repeats and repeats, and it becomes this mesmerizing sound. Just the same 7 things over and over,
Yeah.
but it becomes like a trance. It's beautiful, and the way that you've written the 4 vocal lines over it so differently, because they're all sustained at that point. It's really, really exciting to hear and to sing. I love that part.
Thank you.
You do write a lot of opera, and you've written a couple of songs for us. And so, how do you see writing songs as different than writing an opera? Obviously, opera is big and unwieldy at times, but a song, and this seems to be our commission seems to be unwieldy. But songs in general, are they something that interest you, or are you generally sort of afraid of them or not? How do you approach songs?
You mean songs outside of an operatic context?
Like an art song.
Yeah. It's funny because I before I was doing opera, I was doing musical theater.
Right.
But I've always like the appeal of being a composer at all to me has usually been through a dramatic lens. So
which involves words.
Yes.
Yeah.
I came to art song later, and I really would like to do more.
Mm-hmm.
I find it like so thrilling to to be like not having to wait 10 years to get the piece up.
Opera's a long wait.
But like the challenge of taking a text that the same thing was true of the Whitman text that I said for you guys on Miracles that Daniel sang so beautifully, and figuring out like what actually is the dramatic narrative in here that is always going to be my way in is really exciting for me. Having to take something that wasn't written necessarily to be sung, to be even thought of in a kind of character kind of way, and figuring out for me, like, okay, actually there is a character in here, or maybe there's multiple characters in here, and how can I crack that, and how can the music, like, I mean, that's kind of my way in for music always, is like, what is the next bar, is kind of like, what is the character trying to convey, or is feeling without knowing it. That's a really interesting thing for me to do with art song, and I'm hoping to do a lot more.
We're really so excited about this piece, and thank you so much for lending your wonderful talent to writing it for us. Come and hear Song by Randall Ang to a poem of Bridget Pekin Kelly on October 5th at 4 o'clock at Merkin Hall, Kaufman Music Center.